Skiddy Beggs.
It was a correct approach to design a net to catch fish as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible, and to catch more fish than anybody else, because that is the business of fishing. But in doing that, it's a correct approach also because you target fish and you take fish cleanly.
Exactly.
As to drag a net for a long time through the water,
It's no good.
it's not such a good idea. There are ways of doing it. As the Spanish style of fishing, which is for 3 species particularly only on the west coast. It is for hake, that's merluza. It is for the megrim, and for the monkfish, the rapa.
Yeah, right.
They are targeted by the Spanish fleet on the west coast of Ireland by towing nets with long wings, with deep cover, rather low headline height, on clean ground. And they tow, coming out from Spain, they will tow north and then they will kind of tow back again, so that they do not go over and over the ground. And they gather in these fish that are very valuable to them, and they ignore many other fish.
Yeah.
And their method of fishing does not go in on the rough ground, so that it in itself is a kind of conservative measure. Many other people regard the small mesh that they have as catching a lot of small fish, and that is an area I think perhaps for further research, and I'm sure that research is being done in Spain even at the moment. The other nets that have come into the British Isles, and especially into Ireland, have been greatly influenced by the development in nets in Scandinavia from the 1950s, at the time that the synthetic fibres, nylon and polyethylene, came into use. In Swan Net, we have made midwater nets a specialty, because it was a market that was available to us, and we helped the Irish fleet develop into the very large pelagic fishing. We also make a range of bottom trawls, but the principal business that we're in is midwater trawls. And within that, at this stage, when the company is 21 years old, and when the accumulated experience, fishing experience of our directors, who have all been fishing skippers, is more than 130 years, we are still learning. And the learning that we have is to try to understand better how the fish behave, the different fish, because we catch not only at mackerel, at herring and scad mackerel, but blue whiting to a very small extent, and not exploited by Irish fishermen. Argentines have been taken by the Irish boats, but are not really exploited on a continuous basis. As we are supplying nets at the moment to Iceland for the ocean perch. And these are areas that are somewhat new to us. On the bottom fish, I think it's fair to interpret and understand the pattern of fish as a whole, pelagic fish also, the pattern of fish in Irish waters as something that has natural cycles in it. That may not be regular cycles. They are influenced by other factors in the oceanographic background. And if you examine the records of history, rather incomplete, but bits of information from centuries as far back as the 13th century, you will see that there have been cycles in the fish. And I think they must be taken greatly into account.
That's right.
In the cod fishery in Newfoundland, and we have sold nets to Newfoundland, some, not for the bottom trawling. I sold some for mid-watering, and there are other people in Newfoundland that would like to develop further. But on a visit to Newfoundland, I became aware of the importance of the seal fishery.
Yeah.
As in Newfoundland in previous years. There are various books, some of which recount great tragedies that occurred in the early part of this century at the sealing. And they give an indication of the number of seals that were killed each year, at up to 500,000 seals for furs. And they did not seriously damage the seal population. But since the pressure exerted on the Canadian government by organisations like Greenpeace,
And in France, Brigitte Bardot.
the sealing has stopped. So the seals have multiplied. And what do they eat? Codfish. As they are coming across to this side of the Atlantic, and the same pressure is on us that we cannot harm these furry little creatures. But they are eating the fish stock. There's something of the order of 40,000 seals on the West Scottish coast, just north from us. So who's doing more damage to the cod? And the salmon?
Competition between two mammals.
Competition between two mammals. And they eat fish every day. We only eat it 1 day a week.
Once a week, yeah. Sometimes more.
Sometimes more, yes. On statistics, I think for statistics you would need to go to the Irish Sea Fisheries Board.
Before coming to Kilbeck, I went to Minister of Marine. I met Mr. Gerald O'Keefe.
Yes.
Yeah, so I will get all the statistics. Since 20 years for the annual, and since 10 years for the I will have monthly numbers.
Yes.
So I will be able to. And after, when I will get the data from Ireland, I gathered all the data from Brittany, Wales, and Cornwall, and at the end of the year I will go to Scotland to get the same thing.
As looking at the fishing in the North Sea, for instance, which we have sold nets into, principal nets we would sell to the countries bordering on the North Sea would be midwater trawls to Scotland, Shetland, at 1 or 2 to Faroe, and mostly that. But we have sold bottom trawls down the east coast of England also. And it seems clear that there are factors that the scientific establishment is not recognising, because the approach has been, when they think of conservation, they think of increasing the mesh size, so that they have increased the mesh size in the cod ends. Now, if you look at the whitefish, the demersal fish, in the port of, say, Peterhead, as you will find that the bulk of the demersal fish landed into it over the years was fish from Scottish seine netting, which is a method of catching that gives very good quality. And it was traditionally carried on by vessels of about 75 feet in length, timber, as they developed into steel, and as safety requirements drove them to go somewhat bigger and more powerful. Then you started to get a change in the nets. The nets would get bigger and they could shoot longer ropes and more ropes. But the pressure of increasing the mesh size drove that fleet to methods of fishing to more powerful, to tow faster, and to tow pair seine nets. And I think that the fleet has been pushed more towards trawling. Now, I'm not saying that trawling is necessarily a bad method, but a method that was very good has been pushed into becoming something different because scientists did not understand that this was the method that gave very good quality. On top of that, you've had the attempt to set individual quotas for cod and for haddock and for whiting. And this pressure has led to fish being discarded. And my understanding is that about half the fish that are caught in the North Sea are discarded. And
Excellent.
that cannot be right.
Yeah. I think for the future, I think quality is very important. Like in Concarneau, I have a friend who is a fish merchant.
Yes.
And he asked me why I will be here, to have some address where he can buy fish. And I think he will come with me another time to meet people in order to be able to buy fish.
Yes.
And he is looking for quality. But the problem we have in Concarneau, and I saw it here last night visiting the harbor, is that you are using containers. European community pushed to use for sanitary purpose to use container, but fish are pressed into this container. It's too long, and it's no good for quality. I don't know what you think.
As well, are you talking about pelagic fish?
Yeah. Yes.
Well, the containers in the pelagic fish, I think, will not be sitting in them very long because they're just taken from here to the factory.
Yeah.
As we're not very well graced with deep harbours and good harbours where you can build factories at the edge of the sea.
Yeah.
So that our factories have developed elsewhere. With the new industry, it is. You would imagine that perhaps we would have come and say, well, we will develop this port and put all our factories here, but this did not happen.
Yeah.
So I think we must live with that. But I think the quality landed generally is good.
It's good.
The fishermen in the pelagic fleet are very conscious of quality.
Yeah. Because in Concarneau, it's not pelagic fish, they are trawlers, but they bring a fish after 2 weeks of
Yes.
sea, and the fish arrive, they are not in good quality.
Well, I would think that they should still be in good quality, because when fish properly handled and iced as properly will maintain a good quality for certainly 10 days after being iced. That after 10 days there's a further deterioration.
Yeah.
One of the principal things that is destroying quality at the moment is a regulation from the EC, imposed by the EC, that the cod end of a net must not be more than 100 meshes.
Yeah.
And this applies in the sea area from 56 in all the western sea areas where the mesh is more than 80 millimetre inside mesh. In all nets where the mesh is more than 80 millimetre inside mesh, there can only be 100 meshes. And I believe this is a mistaken policy. The purpose of this regulation seems to be to try to ensure that the mesh opens so that fish can escape from it. But the real effect it is having is compressing fish in a cod end and taking from the efficiency of the net. So when you take from the efficiency of the net must be towed longer to catch the same amount of fish. And the only proper way to approach the quality in that is to allow net makers and fishermen to make a cod end that has more meshes, that is much more round and has more volume within it, as the Spanish nets have, because the Spanish nets are working on an 80 millimetre inside mesh still, and in that they may have as many meshes as they wish. And our experience has shown that they make a very big chamber. There's some other things they do in making the bag of the net, but their purpose is to maintain the quality. And that is something that is very wrong. The EC has made a bad regulation. It's difficult for anybody in the industry to find out who is responsible, and to find some way of saying to this person or persons as, look, this must be changed.
Yeah. We don't know exactly who is running, the European community, how it works, what are the people who are deciding exactly how it will be. I think in Britain we have, Ireland also have an Irish bureau in Brussels, so we must have some people permanently to meet, people in the offices and try to understand and to push in some other directions.
I think myself that the EC is setting out to be a substitute for God.
Yeah, yeah. In some way, yes.
As I think in every way, because in business, in many other ways, we encounter agencies. We have lists of agencies that are there, and the only view that I can have of them is that these agencies are taking our money through our taxes.
Yeah, yeah.
And giving it to other people,
that's right,
who do not and cannot make money for themselves.
Exactly. You're right.
And they are doing it to try to imitate God, who was tempted in the desert, as by the devil, who said, it was written, he shall send his angels to lift thee up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. What do you think about the long nets, 200 kilometers or more? Like,
on gill nets.
Yeah, gill nets. Yeah. But I don't agree that Breton people. I know the person in charge of the Union of Fishermen in Britain, and he asked me to help him in order to promote gill nets. And I know the Breton fishermen, they have the right of 2.5 kilometers, but they put 4 gill nets, one after the other, so it's 10 kilometers. I think it's too much. What do you think about it?
I don't know enough about that particular fishery to comment exactly on that one, but in general, I think that fishermen themselves have to exercise a responsibility.
Yeah.
That if they are using gill nets and they're in very heavy fishing, then I think it's irresponsible to have a great length of net out, because they will not be able to service at all of it.
Yeah.
And there's the danger of killing fish that you just lose. Now, that I think that's a question for individual responsibility. It's the same as for any fishing. As if a pelagic fisherman needs 100 tons to fill his boat and he catches 300 tons, then he's overkilling a bit. I think it's a question of individual responsibility, but for the most part I think fishermen need the gear, because their business is to catch fish to earn a living.
Sure. But sometimes they go too far. As I said, if I don't do it, the neighbor will do it. So
that is life.
Yeah. Okay. But for the future, when there will be no fish left, or for some species.
I think that it is a mistake to get too hung up, to use the English expression, on the negative aspects of conservation. I think that there are things we should be doing to promote. I certainly agree with having knowledge, and I think our fisheries research people should be not only working themselves. I think they should be looking much more. They should be working much more with the fishermen. The fishermen are the people who are in touch with the fish. They are the interface on a daily basis, every day of the year, with the fish, and their observations are very valid, and they should be taken into account much more. But work such as the development of artificial reefs That is something I think that should be looked at.
Yeah.
The fish aggregation devices are not something that have been looked at at our waters particularly, but I think they are worth looking at. To read stories of people who have been shipwrecked at sea and have survived for periods of 6 or 7 weeks, in small dinghies or on rafts, that you find a common experience coming of as algae building up underneath the craft, and this gradually building up as a miniature as ecosystem, as with fish coming in from the ocean as to it. In the purse seining that has taken place for the scad mackerel down in the southern North Atlantic, down in the African coast, there have been accounts of fishermen from Mauritania, or vessels fishing in Mauritanian waters under license, at encountering floating objects in the sea, such as containers that have been washed over from ships, or in one case that I'm aware of a dead elephant floating. And underneath the dead elephant, you had an ecosystem that built up, and the fishermen that encountered the dead elephant made a ring, as with his purse seine net, and he took 300 tons of fish underneath the dead elephant. So as these are things that I believe are being availed of by the tuna purse seiners in the Pacific, where they are using skiffs as with a transponder on board. As allow them to drift so that they build up a mini ecosystem so that tuna will gather underneath for catching. But to me, that's an interesting thing for fishermen, that they can do that. But what's more interesting is that an ecosystem will build up there. It's as if the water is like the earth. As when you turn over the earth, seeds that have been lying in the water or seeds that have been lying in the earth dormant, suddenly they germinate. They awake and germinate. So I think the same thing can happen in the sea. I think we should be looking at it much more.
And the other thing is that the ocean is not uniform, and it's like on Earth there is some fish will live in some area, not another place. It's not so, and we cannot catch always and always. It can have an end.
Yes, yes.
Even if you turn it, but well, we must. It's not like universe that says no end.
No, it is finite. It is finite. But within it being finite.
Yeah, but there is a balance, and it's life, it's nature. Sure. Yeah. So I see, in Kiliweg, big, huge fishing boat.
A small number.
Yeah.
A small number only.
Yeah. And for it's two things I've seen in my data. There's something with mackerel and with soulfish. In Britain there is not too much soulfish left, and I was wondering if it's because of using what is it? The type I don't have the word.
That's a beam trawl.
Yeah, yes. So that they will plow the bottom, and so the spawning ground of the soulfish will be altered.
Well, there is almost no beam trawling on the west coast of Ireland. but there is not so much ground for sole.
Yeah.
And that is black sole,
Yeah.
as on the west coast of Ireland also.
Yeah.
The areas that are very good for black sole are the areas where they're big as areas of muddy bottom. And it seems to me, looking at the experience from at Holland and Belgium,
Yeah.
and the south of England, and also maybe in English waters in Morecambe Bay, that the beam trawling has continued for a good many years, and they still seem to get very considerable catches.
Yeah.
When you read the fishing papers, you see that they still build new beam trawlers. And I think a fisherman will not build a new beam trawler unless he believes
It's good.
that it's good, that he can
Sure.
pay, that he can
Yeah,
pay
sure,
for
sure,
it.
Sure. It was, I've not the data for for Ireland yet, but when I say this, it's in Brittany, watching what was going on in Britain, and there's one thing I don't know in Ireland that will be. There's 1 year 1985, a lot of catches of sole of many fish. I don't know what happens this year.
I think about that year that we probably had, we started to bring in beam trawlers.
Yeah.
And there was a time where we were not beam trawling, and one fisherman, Jerry O'Shea, had bought in a beam trawler and went beam trawling, and he was very successful.
Mm-hmm.
So then other people started imitating him during that 1980s period.
Yeah.
And then because our quota was so limited,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think then the thing has eased back.
No, I understand.
You know, I think that kind of economic circumstances have done that. I think that fishing as in Ireland, perhaps it is still at a business where people believe they can come in with a very ordinary background, as it were. They don't have to have a particularly high level of education,
Yeah, that's right.
even though we have a fishery training school now,
Yeah, yeah,
and that there is the opportunity for them to advance.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
So I think this is perhaps as it should be.
yeah, sure.
If somebody is prepared to work hard and to learn from his experience, then he deserves to go ahead.
It's the same in Brittany, but it's more and more difficult now.
Yes.
That's why I have many friends who are fishermen, and it's why I'm doing this work in order to try to understand more, and in order to I will say keep the future. When I said I was having an evening with two fishermen in Le Croisic, and they have 5 boys, and within the 5 boys, 4 wanted to do the same job as their fathers. So we must do something, because in Brittany it will be hard to continue, because I think it's not like in Ireland. There have been too much overfishing. It's like that. So it's why I have the idea too. It's a way of getting all Celtic countries to work together, because there is no border for fish. They feed in one place, they spawn in other. So we are all concerned by the maintenance of the fish.
One of the difficulties in fish, it is something that is very clear in the salmon fishery in Ireland, that one of the real arguments, when you analyse everything and look underneath, is not about protecting the fish, but about who gets the biggest share of the wealth.
Yeah, also. Sure. Yeah.
And it's interesting, and I think I would finish on it. to think of one of the plays of Shakespeare where there is a scene where there's an old man and a boy at the side of the sea.
Yeah.
And the boy asks the old man, "Master, I wonder how the fishes live." And the old man answers, "Why, lad, as people do. The great ones eat the little ones up."
Yeah. It's right. I get your word of Shakespeare. Okay, this is cool.
Listen, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I think it's I understand much better.
Would you like to see our factory briefly?
Yes,
Please.
please. I don't want to take your time because it's kind of you.